3 years ago, my mother's sister, who caused my mother's death, was recognized by the Anderson family as Mrs. Anderson, but the night before the wedding, my sister-in-law found the Anderson family to be broke and ran off with her foreign boyfriend. The Anderson family's eldest son turned around in public, kneeled before me, pledged all his assets to marry me, and swore that he would never let me suffer in life. After we got married, he did keep his word. In just 2 years, he led the Anderson family back to prosperity and rose to the top of the rich list. He had a jasmine flower tattooed on his chest as a symbol of his loyalty to me. Later, his stepsister returned to the country. He went to the party to welcome her without telling me and got drunk and said, "Jasmine, never apart, Amelia, will you never leave me again?" His stepsister laughed until she fell over and asked him in front of everyone, "Where is Rachel? What about her?" Alexander gently pursed his lips. His eyes became deep. "She won't find out. She's very obedient." I was giving Alexander his daily stomach medicine. With a big belly, at that moment, I heard him confess to his stepsister. He was right. I have always been obedient. So as soon as I heard that he had been drinking at the party, I rushed over without even seeing who was sending the message. He hurriedly came with the stomach medicine. He was afraid that if he was a second late, he would feel unwell. I sneered. Then I turned around and made a phone call. "Teacher, you said before that you wanted me to go abroad and help you. Does that still stand?" The person on the other end of the line paused for a moment. With a face full of surprise, he asked, "Are you sure our project is in Western Europe? If you go, you will have to stay for at least 5 years. Can your billionaire husband, who loves you so much, agree to that? Besides, aren't you already 8 months pregnant?" "Yes, I'm already 8 months pregnant, our child. It'll be born in 2 months, and his father is still expressing his love for another woman in front of other people." I threw the carefully simmered herbal medicine into the trash. My voice was a little shaky. "Sure." The mentor seemed to understand the situation. He said softly, "Rachel, you've been married for 3 years. For the sake of the child, give him 3 more chances. During this time, you can always change your mind." The tears suddenly stopped. I unconsciously touched my stomach. I could just feel the baby move. Once, as if to remind me not to give up on him so easily. "Okay, I'll give him 3 chances." Hanging up the phone, it started to drizzle. I hurried into the bar, just in time to bump into my stepsister, who was out for some fresh air. As soon as the woman saw me, her eyes revealed obvious glee. She asked, "Why I was so late? You've missed the best part." She gave me a disgusted glance at my bulging belly and dragged me towards the private room. "Look at this. Who have I brought along?" Alexander lit a cigarette and said in a relaxed tone, "Let me see. Who is so important that our Miss Amelia herself has come out to greet him?" He stopped before he could finish his sentence. I walked out from behind my stepsister and looked calmly at everyone. "Hello?" Alexander's face suddenly turned pale. He hurriedly stood up, threw the cigarette butt in his hand on the ground and stepped on it to extinguish it, and hurriedly asked the others to open the window to ventilate. He waited until there was no smell of smoke on his body before tiptoeing over to my side. "Rachel, why are you here?" I noticed his concern, but I didn't feel any warmth in my heart at all. He asked me, "You came to the party. Why didn't you tell me in advance?" He froze for a moment. The concern on his face slowly turned to caution. "You're stalking me." My stepsister seized the opportunity. Smiling, she took Alexander's arm. With a provocative tone, she said, "Sister, you're not young anymore. Why are you still so possessive? Alexander is your husband. He's not your son. Does he not even have the freedom to hang out with his friends?" Everyone else also looked at me with a smile. They laughed. "You're nothing but an imposter, Mrs. Anderson. If Amelia hadn't gone abroad, you would never have got this position. Everyone knows that. Alexander and Amelia were a perfect match. Now look at them. Someone has got a bargain. They really think they're something. It's ridiculous. Their comments are getting more and more hurtful, but I keep my eye on Alexander. Do you think so too? It was Amelia who ran away in the first place." "Rachel." Alexander didn't let me finish. His gaze was cold. "She's your sister." "Yes, my sister. She bullied me and called me names. She even got others to join in. That's my sister." The atmosphere suddenly froze in the end. My stepsister, who had seen enough of my humiliation, stepped in to smooth things over. Okay. I just returned to China today. Please do me a favor. Don't make things difficult for her, sis. You're pregnant. You should go home and rest first. Don't upset everyone. What do you think?" I ignored her. I turned around and grabbed Alexander's hand and placed it on my stomach. With the last bit of hope in my voice, I said, "Honey, you'll go home with me and the baby." Okay, Alexander's gaze flickered slightly. He was silent for a moment. Then he gently placed his hand on mine. "Rachel, stop it." He slowly pushed my hand away, as if he wanted to distance himself from me. Puff, someone in the compartment couldn't help but laugh. Then everyone laughed, especially my stepsister. She even pretended to wipe away the tears of laughter. "Sister, you still like to flatter yourself so much." She put her arm around Alexander's waist, playfully winked at him. "Alexander, we haven't had enough time to talk yet. You really have to go." Alexander swallowed. Then he said to me in a disguised tone, "It's getting late. You go home first. I'll come back for you later." I didn't stop him again. I gave him a deep look. Then I turned around and walked away. Alexander, this was the first time. At the reception the next day, Alexander had sent a sapphire necklace early in the morning. He wrote on a note by hand, "This necklace is the only one in the world. It belongs only to you. Don't forget to wear it at the evening reception." I wasn't at all surprised, since we got married. Alexander's favorite thing to do is to give me gifts. In the past 3 years, he has filled the villa's storage room with all kinds of gifts. Even Mama Anderson, who has been a noblewoman for more than 20 years, couldn't help but say sourly that Alexander has forgotten his mother-in-law now that he has a wife. Thinking back, my eyes softened. That evening, I arrived at the reception on time. As soon as I entered, Alexander immediately stopped talking to his business partner and walked towards me. As he walked, he proudly introduced me to everyone. "This is my wife. Well, she's already 8 months pregnant." He put his arm around my waist. His eyes were clear and straightforward. There was no trace of last night's partiality. The others also joked along with great enthusiasm. "Alexander is really something. He's so capable at work. And his family is so happy. It's really enviable." That's right. Everyone in New York knows. Alexander is especially loyal to his wife. They've been married for 3 years. Not only has he never been involved in any scandals, he even reports to his wife on time when he goes out for business. A good man like this is really hard to find these days. Alexander and I were surrounded by warm greetings. I was momentarily lost in thought. I remembered the many days since our marriage. They were right. In the past 3 years, Alexander had indeed been very good to me. Except for my stepsister, he had never been intimate with any other woman. A year ago, he was attending a reception in a neighboring city. Someone climbed into his bed that night wearing revealing clothes. The drunken Alexander immediately sobered up. He called the security guard to take the person away. He even sent me a video in the middle of the night. His red eyes said he missed me. Thinking about this made my heart soften. I couldn't help but gently hook his fingers. Alexander froze for a moment. Then he tightly shook my hand. The corner of his mouth lifted. He smiled happily. "That's it," I said to myself. He was just saying that. He didn't really betray me. It's normal to have difficulty letting go of youthful feelings. In time, it will get better naturally. I took a deep breath. I was thinking about how to explain to the teacher that I had changed my mind. A smile slowly appeared on my face for the first time since last night. But then my smile froze. I saw Amelia. She was my stepsister. She was wearing a long white strapless dress and a large sapphire necklace around her neck. It sparkled in the light. The light woke me up. Unique. Alexander saw her too. He let go of my hand immediately, as if he was avoiding something. "Alexander, Alexander." Someone noticed that he was distracted. Alexander came back to his senses. He hurriedly looked away and forced a smile at me. "Rachel, I'm a little stuffy. I'm going out for some air. Wait here for me." And with that, he left me. He took Amelia by the hand and walked off into the crowd. Amelia obediently followed him. When he walked out of the hotel, he suddenly turned around. He looked me straight in the eye. His expression was triumphant, as if to say, "Rachel, you've lost again." I didn't scream or make a scene. I just pulled off the so-called one-of-a-kind necklace around my neck with a strong tug. My eyes were calm. This was the second time. I wanted to go straight home, but it seemed like it wasn't over yet. Amelia had sent a provocative message, asking me, the only spectator, not to go. She told me to hurry to the hotel car park. I wondered how bad things could get. I avoided the others and crept into the car park. In Alexander's exclusive, jet black Maybach, he was holding Amelia's hand. Angrily, he asked, "Amelia, what the hell do you want?" I told you. "We can do whatever we want in private. But you can't take things to Rachel. If Rachel finds out about this, I won't let you off the hook." Amelia's eyes welled with tears. She stubbornly stared at the indifferent man in front of her. She looked very pitiful. Alexander, I understand that you and your sister are doing well. You don't have to worry. I'm not here to destroy your relationship. I just want to see you again. If it weren't for that incident, I would have been your wife. Alexander froze for a moment, turning his head to the side. But back then, you were the one who decided to run away from the wedding. Amelia blinked, lifting her hand to stroke Alexander's clearly defined face. She whispered, Alexander, I regret it. Alexander's rational mind collapsed in an instant in the dim light. His eyes were red. He eagerly embraced Amelia tightly, madly kissing her. The air around them seemed to grow hot. It sent a sharp pain through my chest. Amelia gently opened her phone. Her voice was tinged with a hint of flirtatiousness. Alexander, tell me, do you like me better than Rachel? Alexander lowered his head. Breathing heavily, he said, Rachel is my wife and you are my lover. Amelia smiled, and then she asked, if that's the case, then when I ran away from the wedding, why did you marry her? Alexander paused. He raised his left hand, which was wearing a wedding ring, to cover his eyes. It was as if he was remembering that terrible day, because the way she covered her eyes was very similar to yours. The call ended. The screen of the phone went dark. It reflected my tired but still beautiful face. It really was similar. I smiled, but tears flowed uncontrollably down my face, dripping down my messy face. I recalled the day my stepsister eloped. Alexander walked through the crowd with bloodshot eyes. I can still remember how Mother Anderson cried and scolded him for being so disgraceful. But he still went ahead and got down on one knee in front of me. Every time we were together, he would gently cover my eyes and whisper, Rachel, I really love you, especially. It turned out, the Rachel he was talking about wasn't me. My heart felt like it was being ripped apart, and the pain made it hard to breathe. But I couldn't help but replay the scene over and over in my mind. Rash's eyes, his hot breath, and Alexander's wedding ring, a symbol of his loyalty. I took a deep breath. I took off the shiny but obviously too big diamond ring on my finger and threw it on the floor along with the sapphire necklace. This was 2 years ago. Alexander had prepared this ring for Amelia, but because of the owner's selfishness and elopement, the ring was on my finger. Now it's time to return it to its owner. I dried my tears. I called my teacher. Teacher, I really can't wait any longer. Can you come and pick me up tonight? I've used up all 3 chances. Yes, they are all used up. The teacher didn't hesitate this time. He said immediately, send me the address. I'll come and pick you up right away. Half an hour later, Alexander calmed down, pushed away Amelia, who was standing nearby. He straightened his clothes while reminding him, remember what I said? Hide it well. Don't let Rachel find it. I don't want to hurt her feelings. Amelia gritted her teeth. She was very dissatisfied, but she still pretended to be obedient on her face. She said to Alexander, Alexander, don't you worry. Alexander stroked her head with satisfaction. Then he reached out and removed the necklace around Amelia's neck. Don't wear this necklace either. It's too conspicuous. I'll get you something else later. Amelia nodded. Okay, Alexander gave a small smile. He opened the car door and got out. You go back first. Rachel must be getting anxious waiting in the hall alone. He didn't finish his sentence. He suddenly stopped. He had received a message on his phone. The sender's note read, this is the only one in my life. Alexander, let's get divorced. The phone dropped to the ground. Alexander's face suddenly turned pale. He quickly picked up the phone on the floor. He repeatedly stared at the message. No matter how many times he read it, the word divorce still stood out. Alexander suppressed his panic. His hands trembled as he dialed my number. He kept praying in his heart. Rachel, please pick up the phone. If you pick up the phone, I can explain everything. The drawn-out intonation kept irritating his nerves. The man's eyes gradually turned red. He really can't help but go find me. He has only taken 2 steps. Suddenly, he feels something hard under his feet. It hurts him through his leather shoes. Alexander looks down. He finds a necklace. His pupils shrink. His carefully selected gemstone necklace. It is now broken into several pieces. Scattered on the floor, the sparkling diamond ring lies quietly on the side. Rachel has been here just now. Did she see everything thinking about this? Alexander fell to his knees in a state of helplessness. He held the ring that he had thrown away tightly in his hands. Amelia, wearing high heels, walked over to Alexander and stopped. Alexander, what's wrong? She glanced at the broken necklace on the ground. The corner of her mouth lifted slightly. After Alexander stood up from the ground, She once again revealed a look of surprised confusion. This necklace looks so familiar. Is it my sister's? Did she just come here? Every time Amelia spoke, Alexander's face grew more and more unpleasant. The man stood high above. He stared down at the woman in front of him. He asked coldly, "You told her?" Amelia met the man's cold gaze. Her body could not help but tremble. The sense of impending danger made her unconsciously lower her head. Tears welled up in her eyes. When she looked up, she had returned to her pitiful appearance. Her hands rested on Alexander's arm. She gave it a gentle shake. "Alexander, Rachel is my sister. She's pregnant. How could I possibly hurt her?" Before, Amelia put on this innocent and coquettish look. Alexander was so weak-hearted. He believed whatever she said. But now, Alexander gave her a cold look. His tone was harsh. "You'd better not lie to me. If I find out who did it, I won't let him off the hook." The woman bowed her head in admission, trying hard to hide her inner unease. After that, Alexander took out his phone and called me, walking quickly away. Amelia stared at the man's receding back, her fingernails digging deep into her palms. His face no longer concealed his anger. He spoke directly. "Rachel, you're just a replacement for me. Why do you have to take what's mine? I'll definitely get you out of here along with the child in your belly." In the hotel, Alexander hurried into the venue, looking for me everywhere. When the same waiter passed by, he stopped him and asked 3 times. He was holding the phone in his hand. The phone kept going unanswered. Messages were sent one after another. "Rachel, where are you, Rachel? What's wrong with you? Why did you suddenly say you want a divorce? What's wrong, Rachel? Don't scare me. Pick up the phone. Tell me what's wrong. We'll work something out together. Honey, I was wrong. Don't scare me. I've been looking for you like crazy in the car." The teacher looked at my haggard expression. His eyes darkened slightly, and finally asked, "Aren't you going to tell him you're leaving? Won't you regret it?" I shook my head and said, "This marriage was a mistake. Leaving it is just correcting the original mistake." The teacher understood. He didn't ask anymore. The car drove straight to the airport. I lowered the window. I tilted my head and let the cold wind blow. I didn't want him to see my tearful eyes. At the beginning, I rejected the teacher's invitation. I chose to get married and have children. He felt both pity and helplessness. He finally said to me, "A man who changes his mind easily will not last long." I didn't believe it. Time will tell. After 3 years of marriage, I was careful in the Anderson household. The in-laws were angry because my sister had run away from the wedding. They despised me even more as an unpopular person who had been temporarily arranged into the Anderson family. They could only save the Anderson group from collapsing through marriage. I kept telling myself, as long as Alexander treats me well, I can endure any injustice. Until today, I have discovered that I am only a substitute for my sister. No matter how good I am to him, he will not be moved. In the hotel, Alexander hurriedly picked up his jacket and wanted to leave. Amelia stopped him. She pointed to the waiter next to her. "Alexander." He mentioned that he had seen Rachel. The waiter immediately understood. He walked up and whispered, "I saw Mrs. Anderson get into a strange man's car in front of the hotel. I've never seen that man before. I don't think he's a regular customer. He might be a friend of my sister's. But my sister doesn't usually like to socialize, and I've never heard her mention any friends. The two of them were in perfect sync. It makes one wonder." Alexander's forehead veins pulsed. His eyes were red as if he were about to explode. We had been married for 3 years. He had never seen me initiate contact with anyone. My social circle was so simple that I could count it on 10 fingers. Now I was told that I had run off with another man under his nose. "Alexander, shut up." The man shouted. His fist slammed down on the table. Everyone looked over. Alexander glared at Amelia with a grim face. His eyes seemed to bore into her. Amelia's face turned pale. She stood stock still. She forgot all about the false accusations she had prepared. After a while, Alexander stood up. He walked out in the astonished eyes of everyone. He ordered, "Get everyone on the move. Have someone keep an eye on all the airports and train stations, and the location and spending records of my wife's phone. Find out everything. Within an hour. I need to know everything." Half an hour passed. Alexander slammed on the brakes. The car came to a stop in front of the villa. The master bedroom window glowed softly. Alexander let out a sigh of relief. The butler had heard the car. He was already standing at the door to greet him. He asked, "Is my wife asleep?" Alexander finished asking. The butler gave him a strange look. "Sir, didn't your wife go to the party with you? She hasn't returned yet." The man immediately ran to the master bedroom on the second floor. He found that none of my things were missing. His gifts were neatly arranged in the corner. His expensive, custom-made clothes were also carefully returned to their packaging. Our wedding photo had also been returned to its box. He sat down on the edge of the bed. His mind kept replaying the look of surprise, emotion, and joy on my face when I received the gifts. These were the gifts he had once used to express his love. Now they had all been returned to him intact. Alexander lay on the bed. His heart was full of remorse. He buried his head in the quilt, breathing hard, trying to ease the fear of losing me. An hour later, news from his staff made him nervous again. "Alexander, I'm sorry. We've carefully checked all the relevant records. We can't find any information about your wife's spending, even the car that took your wife away. We can't find any registration information." Alexander locked himself in the master bedroom for 3 whole days. During these 3 days, he numbed himself with alcohol every day, trying to return to the dream where I was there. In the dream, he stood at the wedding, sadly watching Amelia in her wedding dress, and ran away without looking back. From the stage, the guests' comments kept echoing in his ears like a spell. Alexander wanted to save his bankrupt company by marrying into it, but the bride didn't even look at him. She would rather run away from the wedding than marry him. The Andersons used to be so prosperous. Now they are like a fallen phoenix. Even the most insignificant Anderson family dare not offend. Look, the Anderson daughter has run away from the wedding. The Anderson parents still have to smile. It's really suffocating. Just as he said, the parents named suddenly appeared, reaching out to take his arm. A twisted smile appeared on his face. "Think of something quickly. Otherwise, we will all lose face because of you. You are useless." He stood in the middle of the stage, not knowing where to put his hands and feet. His eyes were full of despair. Until he saw me in the midst of all those complicated gazes, only my eyes were clear and bright. At that moment, his heart suddenly moved. He took the bouquet of flowers and walked up to me, seeing me nervous and blushing. He suddenly plucked up the courage to say, "Will you marry me? I promise I will treat you well for the rest of your life." I stared in amazement, wanting to refuse, but the words stuck in my throat. I understood the intention behind the Anderson family's marriage alliance, and I knew that I was not the person chosen by both families' parents. Looking at Alexander, who looked so fragile that he seemed like he would break if I touched him, my heart softened. Unconsciously, I nodded my head. Then, with tears in his eyes, he took my hand and walked me down the aisle. We made a promise. We put on rings. He turned all his gratitude, joy, and excitement into a gentle kiss and gently placed it on my forehead. Perhaps that day, he had feelings for me, but Amelia was always a regret in his heart, so when she showed weakness, he could no longer hold back. Alexander touched the wedding ring I had thrown away, and finally couldn't help but sob softly. The bedroom door opened gently. Amelia quietly walked in. Alexander touched his aching forehead and unconsciously said, "Rachel." Amelia's expression froze, unhappy, and said, "She ran off with someone else." What's there to think about? When she was at school, she flirted with married men for money, and then she took you away from me. If it weren't for her meddling, I wouldn't have run away from the wedding. Since Rachel ran away first for fear of things being exposed, can we start over again, Alexander? Do you know how much I missed you during all those years abroad?" Alexander looked at that face that resembled mine. His eyes gradually cleared up a bit. "Alexander, you and her split up. Let's get back together." Amelia gently stroked his face. Her fingers slowly glided over his forehead, nose, lips, neck. She was about to go down, but her hand was suddenly grabbed. The woman looked up, with a surprised face, just in time to see the man's indifferent gaze. The man said coldly, "What makes you better than Rachel?" Alexander pulled sharply. Amelia didn't stand firm, and fell to the ground. He stood in front of her, fixing his clothes, and said coldly, "I know everything about your time abroad. You're no different from those lowlifes. You think I'll divorce you for you? Forget it." Amelia looked at the man in front of her in disbelief. She never thought he would speak of himself in such harsh terms. At that moment, the phone rang. His subordinate said excitedly, "Alexander, we found the route of the car through the hotel's surveillance system. Your wife arrived at the airport before it was locked down. The city we ended up in is Germany. Arrange a private jet immediately," Alexander said, and walked straight out of the house. Amelia was left alone again. The resentment in her eyes could no longer be hidden. "I've settled in abroad. My teacher helped me find a small, detached villa. The view is beautiful. It's especially suitable for recuperation before giving birth. The day after moving in, my teacher carefully handed me a file folder. He said, "I've got some news about the matter you asked me to look into. You need to be prepared." I was a little puzzled, but I couldn't resist my curiosity. There were a lot of photos and a video of tea. They were all records of Amelia's life abroad over the years. She found a foreign boyfriend soon after she left the country, but he cheated her out of all her money and eventually dumped her. He had tattoos and a perm. He looked like a scoundrel. Compared to Alexander, he was a world apart. Seeing that I didn't react, the teacher went on to tell me about her experiences. Later on, she used her looks and figure to quickly become the plaything of certain powerful people. But I never imagined your sister would have such bad taste. She even chose an old man in his 70s. She became his exclusive canary. She didn't say anymore, but I could already guess from the photo. Alone in a strange foreign country, without money and unable to speak the local language, it's easy to be bullied. She was afraid of going back to China. She was afraid that if she went back, she would be forced to marry into the Anderson family, a family that could go bankrupt at any time. So she preferred to be the plaything of a powerful man. She was passed around several times. Eventually, she ended up with an old man in his 70s. The old man had strange behavior and many tricks every few days. She had to go to the hospital for a while. Sometimes she wasn't even fully recovered before she was picked up and brought home. The first time she mustered the courage to contact her stepmother, only to find out that Alexander had been secretly asking her stepmother about her. She then felt that she shouldn't have done so. Amelia took the opportunity of being in hospital to quietly leave her sugar daddy. When she returned home, she felt an indescribable sense of disgust at the thought of Alexander having sex with Amelia, despite the risk of contracting an infection. The teacher's voice pulled me out of my memories. I crumpled the photo in my hand and stuffed it back into the bag. My face wasn't looking too good. The teacher asked me, "Rachel, are you okay?" "I'm fine, teacher, thank you for today." After the teacher left, I couldn't hold back anymore. I ran to the bathroom and vomited until I passed out. I didn't expect Alexander to find me so quickly. Logically, we have such a good relationship. We should be inseparable now. When he walked up to me, his heavy breathing and hot breath were blown into my ear. I was convinced that this was not a dream. "Rachel, I've been looking for you for a long time." His voice sounded like it had been sanded with sandpaper. It was hoarse and without a trace of softness. "Come back with me." "Okay," I realized I was wrong. "You can hit me and scold me, but please don't leave me." "Okay." Alexander reached out to pull me into his arms. I took a half step back. I avoided him. I said to him, "Alexander, I won't go back with you. From the moment you chose to betray me, our relationship is beyond repair." The man clenched his fists, trying hard to control his emotions. "Rachel, you have to think about the children. You can't let them be born into a single-parent family, even if you don't care. But as the father of the children, I won't agree to this." Alexander's tough attitude made me angry. "Alexander, whether you say yes or no, I'm not going with you. Compared to a single-parent family, I'm more worried about the child having a father who is unfaithful to the family." "Rachel." The man was about to finish his sentence when someone behind him hit him with a club and knocked him unconscious. At that moment, two tall men walked out from behind me. They said, "Miss Rachel, someone wants to see you." The warehouse was pitch black. It smelled musty and decaying. The lights suddenly came on. The glare made it hard to open my eyes. "Rachel, we meet again." Amelia gave a twisted smile. Her eyes were filled with a sick hatred. "I never thought that Alexander would go abroad for you, but if it weren't for him, I wouldn't have been able to find you." I smiled helplessly. "You've already succeeded. You're afraid you won't be able to win his heart." My words seemed to trigger a memory in her. She clenched her teeth and slapped me. "You're just like your mother. You're so eloquent. You'll die young." Back then, my stepmother took her to the Andersons and forced my mother to choose, either divorce or leave the family home. When my mother was at her wit's end, called me. Crying, she told me about her situation. When I got home, my mother was gone. My father had married my stepmother. No one would believe it if I said they had nothing to do with it. But my father insisted that my mother had run away with someone. He warned everyone not to mention her again. When I heard her call her a short-lived ghost, I became even more suspicious of the reason my mother left. Seeing my confusion, Amelia laughed even more triumphantly. "So you don't know that your mother is dead. Since you're dying anyway, I'll tell you something. Your mother never left your family. She died there a long time ago. That day was the first time we went to your house. Your parents argued all day. It was a simple divorce, but your mother refused to sign the papers. Later, that woman even attacked me and my son. She fell down the stairs and had an accident. Don't look at me like that. Your father killed your mother. Not me. Those words hit me like a hammer. They made me dizzy. Amelia looked at me as I crumbled. She said slowly, "Your mother was still alive when she fell down the stairs, but we wanted her dead. No, that's not possible. How could that be? My parents loved each other. That's ridiculous. He even handled your mother's body himself. Do you know how much determination and strength it takes to cut someone into pieces?" I didn't listen to what he said after that. It turned out that my father, who doted on his wife, was so hypocritical. Alexander shouted angrily. He looked at me. His eyes were full of pain and apology. "Amelia, I warned you. If you dare to hurt Rachel, I will never let you go." After hearing Alexander's words, Amelia was overwhelmed by jealousy. She took out the knife she had prepared from her bag and stabbed me directly in the stomach. Alexander suddenly rushed in front of me, pulled me into his arms, and protected me tightly. The blade cut through the air, leaving a bright red mark. Alexander's cheeks were already red with blood. He asked, "Are you hurt?" Alexander hugged me, looking up and down, but I frowned. Amelia rushed at me again with a knife. I couldn't dodge in time. Alexander pushed me away. I felt a sharp pain in my abdomen. Blood was pouring from my leg. The scene in front of me gradually blurred. I saw Alexander hugging the out-of-control Amelia. The knife stabbed Alexander over and over. Blood kept gushing out. A few minutes later, Alexander finally couldn't hold on anymore. He fell to the ground. Amelia was holding the knife. She walked towards me again. "Rachel, I'm going to take out the baby in your belly now." Amelia raised the knife. I helplessly closed my eyes. Suddenly, there was a loud noise from the warehouse door. Amelia was startled and trembled. The knife in her hand almost fell to the ground. The old man walking in front of me I knew. He was the last old rich man who had supported Amelia. Seeing the person coming, Amelia immediately dropped the knife. Without thinking, she was ready to escape. She didn't get far. She was caught by the bodyguard. "I am the Anderson family's eldest daughter. If you don't let me go, I'll make your lives miserable tomorrow." The rich man gave her a contemptuous look and said, "You've been with me for a long time. You've finally developed some character. Don't forget, you're just a dog in my care. You dare to run away when your master is away. It seems that the only way to cure your problem is to break your legs." Amelia's face paled at the man's words. She knelt on the ground in fear and kissed the old man's gold-embellished shoes. "No, sir, I will never run away again. Please forgive me this time, please." Amelia was taken away. Alexander and I were also taken to the hospital by the teacher who had rushed over. The delivery was very dangerous, but 12 hours later, I gave birth to the baby safely. Alexander sat by the bedside feeding the baby. He was still wearing the bloody clothes from yesterday. The bloodstains had dried. His face was as pale as a corpse. He said, "Rachel, thank you for giving birth to our child. Once you've recovered, we'll go back home. This time, Mom and Dad will be happy too, don't worry. Amelia will never show up again. I'll treat you well." I forced a smile. All my emotions boiled down to one word: get lost. During my stay in the hospital, Alexander took care of me, but I ignored him completely. No matter how hard he tried to please me, I was determined to get a divorce. On the 25th day, I decided to have a serious chat with Alexander. "If you want to see your child again, sign this divorce agreement." I threw the agreement on the table, crossed my arms. "Alexander, it's over between us. We're both adults. It's better for everyone if we part on good terms." Alexander stared at me, reassuring himself. "Rachel, can't you just give me one more chance?" I shook my head firmly and said, "No, one failure is never used again." Alexander finally agreed to the divorce, but when he signed it, he was probably too emotional. His hand trembled so much that he couldn't hold the pen steady. Later, he saw Amelia's message on the dark web live broadcast again. She was tied to an execution bench. She was suffering all kinds of torture. She could neither escape nor beg for death. With a few simple words, she let me quickly contact the forensic expert through my teacher's relationship. At the Anderson family mansion, they chipped away at the concrete embedded in the wall. Anderson's father and stepmother were pale. They were taken away. 3 months later, I had just chosen a beautiful cemetery for my mother. I received a notice from the lawyer. "Miss Rachel, your divorce proceedings have been finalized. Alexander asked me to give you a document." I opened an encrypted file and found a gift agreement inside. Alexander has given my son Ryan. Alexander has given it to my son Ryan. 5 years later, I have finished my project in Western Europe. I am planning to start a new life plan. Suddenly, someone knocks on the door. Alexander is standing in the doorway. He is holding a bouquet of roses in his hand. Rachel, the project is over. Congratulations, now you have time. Can you give me a chance? Let me chase you properly. I quietly extend my left hand. The ring, a perfectly round pigeon's egg, dazzled him once again. I'm getting married next week. Don't forget to prepare the red envelope.